Well, we're in this series thinking about the idea of up in the Bible. And we return today to a group of Psalms that play with that idea. Psalm 126 is one of the Psalms of ascent. There are 15 of them. They begin at Psalm 120. And they're given that title because they were used by pilgrims on the way up to the temple at Jerusalem, or as verse 1 of Psalm 126 puts it, Zion, as Jerusalem is sometimes called. And they were God's people traveling there to the center of worship to celebrate. And so the songs of ascent begin a long way from home, and they ascend literally because Jerusalem was up higher. So the pilgrimage was a climb upwards, but they ascend in the sense of building as well. And they build in joy. And so what you find is that they begin as songs of homesickness and longing, and yet they arrive in rejoicing at the end of the journey. And what that means is that Christians have always found in the songs of ascent something deeper. They give us more than simply an account of a historic people. They are more than songs from an old journey. They give you a glimpse of the pilgrimage of the heart. They map out the route that every Christian heart will take, the experiences that we can expect to go through as we seek to follow Jesus. And in that respect, these Psalms are incredibly practical. They help you live right now. And Psalm 126 is a wonderful example of that. It's a song of the past, about the future, that helps you live in the present. It says the way, in fact, the only way you can live in the present, the only way you can live well now, is to learn to use the past and the future. And we're going to take a look at each of them this afternoon. And we're going to start in the past, which seems like a good place to go, doesn't it? So the past. Here's the first one. The psalm begins by looking backwards. Verse 1. When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dreamed. Our mouths were filled with laughter, our tongues with songs of joy. The psalmist begins by remembering a time where God had brought rescue, where he had acted to save his people. Now, there could be lots of times that this refers to. There were many moments where God did that for his people. This psalm isn't specific in telling us which moment is being referred to, which moment is being thought of. In fact, it actually seems deliberately vague. It deliberately doesn't seem to tell us. And that phrase in verse 1, restored our fortunes, is an interesting one. Because you can translate it that God, it literally says God brought back the banishment, which is a way of saying God released from captivity. He freed from imprisonment. So this could actually reference a time where God's people were literally imprisoned. They were captured. They were made prisoners. But it can also mean more broadly a sense of a return home, a sense of coming back to where you belong, a sense of coming home to God after a time of alienation, trial, and difficulty, a coming back to Zion, to the place where God dwelt with his people. But whatever it was exactly, it's an experience of hardship and trial that's been remembered. And it's become hardwired into their memories. It's something they sing about. And I guess you might say, well, why? And the obvious answer, of course, would be partly the trauma. Catastrophes live in the memory, whether we want them to or not. Individuals, nationally as well, were shaped by them. We can never forget certain events. The past shapes us. Hard times still haunt us. But that isn't actually the focus of the psalm as it looks backwards. The focus is on the restoration and the joy that brought. Look at the beginning of verse 2. Our mouths were filled with laughter, our tongues with songs of joy. That joy is incredibly powerful. One writer says it is a delirious happiness that has been spoken of here. Okay, this isn't simply just, yeah, it was nice. It was overwhelming. And that's why this rescue is remembered so powerfully, because the joy of a rescue like that puts down even deeper roots. The joy filled them up. It's an overflow of joy, says verse 3. The Lord has done great things for us, and we are filled with joy. It fills them up. It spills out in singing. But what you've got to see as they look back to the past is the way this joy works. This is about human deliverance. This is about human people experiencing freedom, and that brings them incredible happiness. It's about them being joyful, something they feel. This comes to them as real people, flesh and blood people, just like you and me. And the joy that they feel as people is real. But did you notice the focus of the psalm? It includes people, but the focus is unmistakably on God. Do you see that? The joy is centered in and around God. All comes from God. The psalm begins with him. Verse 1, when the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion. He's the rescuer. He is the deliverer. They didn't do this. He was the one who took the initiative. In fact, when they say in verse 1, we were like those who dreamed, this is not what they're saying. All of our dreams came true. That is not the feeling here. The sense here is this. We woke up and we found out God had redeemed us. In other words, we had nothing to do with this. It's as if we went to sleep and then we woke up and we found that God had delivered us. He'd rescued us. He'd saved us. That's what it means. He did all the work. It's a way of saying we took no part in this, but God did it anyway. And that's underlined then when in verse 2 you get this talk of the nations. Second part of verse 2, then it was said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The nations here mean the people looking on from the outside. They don't even follow God. And what are they saying? Well, notice that they're not saying, whoa, these are impressive people. Look at them. Look at how they've rescued themselves. No, they're looking on. You get the sense that they're looking on and saying, what, that God must be incredible if he can rescue people like that. That God must be amazing if he's able to deliver them at such an incredible state. So the joy they look back on, it's overwhelming. It fills them up. It's centered in the heart, but it's all located in and around God. Now, two applications straight away, really important. Here's the first one. Salvation always brings joy. Joy is the constant response to God saving, to God rescuing and delivering. And here is the reason why. It's because you can never really get over just how amazing it is that you've been freed. One of the telltale giveaways of a Christian is that they are utterly astounded when they talk about their salvation. They just can't quite believe it. See, lots of people think that Christians are people who just consider themselves better than other people. They look down on other people. They kind of think they're superior, but that is never the case when salvation touches the heart. A Christian is someone who knows they're not superior, who knows they're broken, who knows they're undeserving, helpless, but that God has rescued them anyway. And the greater you know the depth of your helplessness, the greater you find your joy, because you realize just how deep the pit you've been rescued from was. See, salvation will always bring joy. A disbelief. And here's the second thing. Joy comes as a byproduct. It comes as a byproduct of something else. What do I mean? Where does the joy come from here? The joy comes from, it flows from a focus on what God has done. You don't get the joy by aiming for joy. You get joy by seeking God. In fact, let me put it this way. Do you know how you get the deepest and most satisfying life? When you stop looking for the deepest and most satisfying life and instead fix your eyes upon the only one who can provide the joy and level of satisfaction that your heart is really yearning from. So many of us have experienced this. The harder we try and get the very thing that we're looking for, it seems the more it slips through our fingers. And yet here is what this psalm shows us. The Bible teaches us there is a kind of joy that you only get when you stop aiming for it. When you aim for God, then you find the level of joy that your heart looks for. Joy comes as you focus on God. See, they begin in the past, but this isn't a slip to nostalgia. This isn't kind of a longing for the good old days, because it leads here. There's a move in the psalm. The past leads to the future. Listen to verses 4 onwards. Restore our fortunes, Lord, like streams in the Negev. Those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy. Those who go out weeping, carrying seed to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with them. Psalmist begins by looking at what God did in the past. And here it stirs him. This is what it stirs him to, praying that God would do the same for their future. Verse 4 is a prayer. It's a hope-filled prayer. A prayer for the future that repeats exactly the same language as verse 1. Did you see that? The language of restoration. The psalmist is saying, God, you know what you did for us in the past. Please now, will you not act and do the same for us to give us that future? We know what you've done. Please, oh please, would you repeat it? And that prayer for the future, there are two images, there are two pictures that are used, and you must understand both. Because if you only understand one or the other, you'll end up veering pretty seriously off course. Here's what I mean. Here's the first image. It's the image of a stream. Verse 4, restore our fortunes, Lord, like streams in the Negev. The Negev was an area of desert. And the only way a stream would run in the desert is after rain has fallen. Otherwise, it's entirely dry and barren. But when the rain fell, then suddenly the streams would flow. Dry gullies would turn into a torrent. The water would often see an explosion of life that would follow. It would cause grass and flowers to flourish, an incredible transformation. And so the picture here is immediate. It's rapid transformation. It's sudden. And the psalmist prays, God, will you not transform us like that? This is a prayer for restoration that's immediate, that God would act again, that God would restore the glory, that God would transform a barren and a cheerless situation. This is a prayer for sudden and dramatic change. And doesn't that echo the desire of our hearts? Doesn't that map onto so many of our prayers? We long for God to move. We long for God to change things, personal change, situations to be transformed, a sin to be dealt with, a brokenness to be healed, our nation to be changed. We want him to do it now. And here's what, let me say, those are so often good prayers. It is right for us to pray that way. God's people always have prayed that way, and God can answer those prayers in sudden and dramatic ways. After all, the psalmist has just told us that is exactly what he's remembered, a time when God did that. And perhaps that is exactly the same for your experience too. And you pray, God, I remember when you changed this situation. Oh, please, will you not come and change this now? I know you've done it before. Do it again. We're right to pray like that. But there's a second image, and you have to hold this one too. This one's a harvest. Listen to verse 5. Those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy. Those who go out weeping, carrying seed to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with them. Now, this time the song takes us to the farm, and it is a picture of sowing and reaping, of seeds that turn into a harvest. And now the image has similarities with the desert and the stream, because there still is a change here. And it's a dramatic one. The seed turns into sheaves of corn. Now, have you ever seen a field when it's been sown with seed? Have you ever noticed it? No, of course you haven't. The reason being is because there's nothing to see. It just looks like a messy field. There isn't anything to see. Soil that's been churned up a little bit. Unless you grew up in the West Country like I did, not much to be excited about. But then have you seen a field at a time of abundant harvest? Yeah. Because there's so much to see. It's an absurd difference. Fruitful, exploding with life. Now, what's the difference? The stream and the harvest, the desert and the field. Here is the difference. One is immediate, but the other is gradual. One happens in the blink of an eye. The other is measured in days, weeks, months, sometimes years. And that's why you have to have both images. It's as if the psalm is protecting us, actually. Because we should pray for the immediate change, for transformation now, but there is another kind of change too. Another kind of timescale that God often works on, and this one isn't as dramatic. It's not now. It requires patient sowing. It's the discipline of a farmer, the result of continual work, and it is so important that you see that. In fact, so important that the psalm repeats the image both in verse 5 and in verse 6, the same image. But this one's hard, isn't it? This is hard because it takes time. More on that in a moment. But it's hard because it's also heartbreaking. The seed sown here is our tears. It's our tragedies, trials, our suffering and sorrows. That's what's being sown. And doesn't it feel that way sometimes? That the only thing we've been sowing seems to be the tears that we've been weeping. And nothing seems to be happening. Nothing seems to change. We're stuck in the same pattern. The sickness is still there. The pain won't go away. The relationship is still as hard as it ever has been. The habits still can't be broken. But look what this psalm is telling us. Look at what it's telling us. Here's the first thing. You're not the first one ever to experience this. And that should bring comfort. You're not abnormal as a follower of Jesus to experience tears and sorrow. There is huge comfort to know that not just that, but that God sees and knows the tears. The Bible actually says that explicitly. There's another psalm, Psalm 56 and verse 8, where the psalmist says, "Record my misery, list my tears on your scroll. Are they not in your record?" That one actually can be translated, "Are they not in your wineskin, your bottle?" God collects the tears. So intimately does he know everything and all the heartache. And it means more. Psalm 26, 126 tells us these tears aren't just cried, they're sown. They're sown. You know, this isn't just a motivational message. I need you to see that. This isn't just the Bible's version of, well, don't worry, things will just get better, so hold on. The hope here is not, yes, you're crying now, but you won't always be, so hold on because things can only improve. See, if that's how you live, you'll know this. If you haven't already, you'll find out. I'm sorry, there's no way of avoiding it. Here's the thing, here's the problem. Things sometimes get better. But you know what else happens? sometimes they get a lot worse. And if the only hope that you've got is, well, maybe tomorrow won't be quite as bad as today, what happens when you wake up and it is? See, the message of Psalm 126 is better. It is better. It is better for how we live, and it changes us in the here and now, because with God, we sow tears knowing there is a harvest yet to come. Which takes us to the last thing, which is how the past and the future really allow us to live in the present. Because Psalm 126 is sung in the present. See, there is a way to harness what has happened and the future that may and will happen that means you become a different person in the present. You'll be really pleased to know I had a list that went on to about 6 things. 2. Just going to give you 2. You can become, do this, learn this. You'll become a person of hope and a person of patience. Hope. We said that the last part of the psalm is about the future. I want you to listen again to it and notice the strange thing. It speaks of a future, but it's written in the present. Listen, those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy. Those who go out weeping, carrying seed to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with them. You see it? It's as if the psalmist is saying, they're already in my hands. The harvest is so tangible. So how did they do that? Here is how. With God, a promise is as good as happened. They knew enough of his character. Remember where it began. He is the God who delivers. He is faithful. They used the past. They looked at what he'd done to deliver and rescue and say the way he heard their cries, the way he'd seen their suffering. And that meant that in the present, they live filled and fueled with hope. They look ahead with certain joy. So you focus on God like that, you can live as though the harvest is already in. Is it hard? Yes. Is it heartbreaking? Yes. But there is hope here. See, verse 6 can translate, whoever persists in going out. See, how can you keep going? It's only if there is the hope of a harvest yet to come. The psalm says you remember all the faithfulness of his past actions, and it will build up hope. Do that. Do that. Look back at your own life. Remember what God has done for you. Look back at God's people. Remember what God has done for his people. But also know his promise for a future harvest that is coming. So you become a person of hope. And then here's the other thing. You become a person of patience. I told you we'd come back to this, which is kind of a test to show how much we need it. How do you become a person of patience? Why is it that waiting is so difficult? Impatience, so easy, but waiting so hard. I've spoken about this before here on a Sunday, but I think partly it is our time in history, the time we live in. It's an impatient culture. Everything moves faster, tech is faster, same-day delivery, cars, transport, speed up travel. One of the marks of our culture is that everything is instant, everything is now, and it skews our understanding of waiting. I was telling my kids when I played my first computer game, it was on a cassette tape, and thanks, Matt. It really was, and not just because it was retro. That was cutting edge, and you would load the cassette tape, and you would load a level. Would take around about an hour to load, and it'd be done in a minute, and it was wonderful. It was just glorious, and you play for a minute, and then you go out and you play some. It probably wasn't quite as good as this actually. I'm sure there's raised tinted spectacles going on here, but then I play with my kids on Mario Kart. And it's like, oh, this level's taking ages to load. Like, it's 2 minutes, 2 minutes. No, it wasn't 2 minutes. It's like 20 seconds, not even 20 seconds. It's probably about 3 seconds, actually. This is nothing. And now some of us get impatient when someone has the audacity not to reply to a message we've just sent them within 30 seconds. They've left me read, but they've not replied. Do you remember writing letters? Some of you will remember writing letters by hand with a pen, sending them by post, walking to a post box, waiting weeks for a reply. I had for about, and actually there's no time for this. I've had a very brief pen pal in France until it turned out that I was a terrible pen pal. But when you waited for an airmail letter, do you remember that they took even longer? Even longer. Now, what am I saying? You just sound like you're terrible. This is an awful kind of reminiscence, and everything was better back in you youngers. You're so miserable, and you just need patience. It's nothing like that at all. Here is what happens. Our culture is instant. I don't think necessarily people are more impatient now. Here's just what we live in. We live in a time that changes our view of time. And the challenge at the heart level is it amplifies our sinful impatience. It just turns it up to 11. And we struggle being patient with other people. We become impatient with what they do. We become impatient because they seem maddeningly inefficient in our systems and our structures and the way things should move. We treat people like downloads, and if they're slower than we want, then we just close the page, quit the download. We're done with it. We become impatient that people are complex and contradictory. Relationships take time and investment. They're rarely instant. But here's, in the context of this psalm, here is the point. More seriously, our culture amplifies our impatience with God. Because we think God should act like an instant message. But he doesn't. And understanding Psalm 126 will give you a different perspective. God is working on more than one time scale. Do you know that? One is rapid, at least to our eyes rapid, but the other requires patient waiting. But both are real, and both are from his hand. Now, as we finish, you might be saying, listen, this is who I want to be. I want to be a person of hope. I want to be a person of patience. I want to be able to know that, to have something deeper, but it's so hard. How can I? Well, remember I said that these songs of ascent trace the arc of Christian life. They show you the map. And the map for every Christian life is a direction of moving upwards. It is a movement of every Christian, a pathway of every heart from weeping towards joy, from sowing towards reaping, from destruction to restoration, from sadness transformed to rejoicing. You say, how do you know that? Well, if in Psalm 126 they glimpsed enough of God's character to hope, we can know with greater certainty, because here's what we've seen, what God has done for us in Jesus. You see, here is what the gospel message says. Christianity says Jesus comes down into the brokenness, that he exchanged eternal joy to come and weep with us, that he exchanged eternal rejoicing to become a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. He came to experience all the trials and brokenness of sin. He died on a cross. Why? To turn my weeping to joy, my destruction to restoration, to transform my sadness into rejoicing. And as he rose from the dead, he secures a future more amazing than we can possibly imagine. It is his resurrection that gives us the certainty of Psalm 126. Do you know one of the ways the New Testament describes the resurrection of Jesus? It's with a farming image. It says that the resurrection of Jesus is the first fruits of the full harvest yet to come. That means that Jesus' resurrection shows you the truth of your future resurrection. It's the start of a harvest to come that includes you as well. That is the destination of all who trust in Jesus. It is the destination of the whole cosmos. As clear as their pilgrimage up to Jerusalem, we are heading, longing, yearning for a future resurrection. And when you come to Jesus, you can know the hope and the joy of Psalm 126 erupt into your life. His is the act of the past that secures your future and transforms your present. And if you're not yet a Christian, do you see how much you need this? You need an honest assessment of life. Can I just encourage you to do that? The spirit of Psalm 126 is an honest assessment. Why do you long for change? Because you know something needs changing. Why do you want transformation? The kind of transformation that's like a stream flowing in a dry place, only because you know that your life right now is dry and lifeless. You have to learn to see the way things are. That can be hard, but no, it's the kind of hardness that only will give you the pathway that accesses the hope that can change. Because only that will bring you to Jesus.